I recently finished another fantastic experience on the Nintendo Switch, Dragon Quest XI. If you missed the previous video where I talked a little bit about this game, the demo is what sold me on not just getting this game, but getting it as soon as I did. It was a game I was curious about. I played a handful of Dragon Quest games in the past and always enjoyed the series, but I wasn't quite certain if I wanted to go out and buy this one. I wanted to check out the demo, maybe get it 5-6 months from now when the price goes down, but the demo just kept going and going. It actually took me 2 days to play through. It was well over 10 hours by the time I was done with the whole thing. And at that point, realizing also that it really was just the first 10 hours or so of the game, and you could just continue on from that point, I wasn't going to wait. I was going to grab it. I was too invested at that point. Over 10 hours, I mean, I've played plenty of full games that are shorter than what this demo was. Way too invested. Wasn't going to wait half a year or more and then redo all that. I was just going to grab the game. So I grabbed the game, and I am very happy that I did. It was a fantastic experience. One of the better RPGs I played in later years, and I was enjoying it from the very start, but it hit a point during the second act, really, where it became overall my favorite Dragon Quest game, finally beating out Dragon Quest VIII, the one that Level 5 worked on for the PlayStation 2, that was later also put on the 3DS. The story of Dragon Quest XI can really be broken into three major parts, in Act 1, 2, and 3, with a credit sequence and sort of false ending at the end of Act 2, and then a post-game with a true ending in Act 3. And it really does feel like three distinct segments to this story, and I like them to varying degrees. That was the one thing. Overall, everything from the music, Akira Toriyama's art style used throughout the whole game, everything from the characters, everything about this I really enjoyed. I didn't do a whole lot with the 2D mode. I kind of want to go back and check some of that out. I only did a couple times. It just wasn't quite as into it. It felt, I don't know, I really liked it and I appreciated it, and I played some of the older Dragon Quest games. The original on the NES is the first one, but I just wasn't quite as into that as the full 3D mode. I don't know, it just didn't click with me quite as much, so I mostly stuck with that throughout the game. Getting into the story, those three acts I was talking about, because that's really the main point of this game, as far as why I really enjoyed it and where I had a couple of issues. Because the gameplay-wise, everything else was just perfectly fine. Everything else was fantastic, and it was all very, for the most part, traditional Dragon Quest, but never to its detriment. It was just an enjoyable, very classic-feeling RPG series. You did have a few things, like I enjoyed all the different mounts and things that you could ride. Of course, you have a horse, you could find, a slime, you could ride in the cage under the dress later on for one of the monsters, and just those types of different things. The way they were utilized in the environment, sometimes to fly up or to hop up, and those exoskeletons, those egg skeleton things, the metal ones, and hop up different levels up the mountainside, and those things were all utilized very well. And there were lots of little creative things, great gameplay with the turn-based combat. I mean, it was all just so well done, but the main thing that stood out to me and why I was so invested into this were the story and the characters. I really enjoyed the cast. It started out because you have the silent protagonist, which I'm never a big fan of, and overall, even though I liked Eric and Serena and Veronica, during the demo portion of the game, I was really getting into the story and I was enjoying the characters, but it still at that point felt almost a little, not quite cliche, but just a little too standard JRPG from that perspective, but it was still just early going. It was still good and enjoyable, and I hadn't real complaints, but it wasn't really outstanding. But it became outstanding as not just the cast grew, but as you explored more of the world and the story came together. It was fantastic, and a few minor spoilers here as far as the structure of the story. I'm gonna try and leave out a lot of specific details if you haven't played it, but if you really don't want to hear anything about the structure of the story either, I would shy away now, because I'm going to talk a little bit about that, to talk about what really I enjoyed or disliked about the game. You get through Act 1, and it is almost, at the very last moment, it almost feels like, and at that point it was 30-something hours, it almost felt like it could have been the end, it could have been the final fight. I knew it wasn't going to be, but it could still have worked that way, where you go and reach for the Sword of Light, and then at the last minute you're stopped. It could have been just turning into the last boss fight, and that could have been the game. It would have been a lesser game for sure, but it could have happened. It was structured in a way that it was still fairly satisfying. And at that point, to that point, the game was really good, but wasn't my favorite Dragon Quest game ever. I still preferred 8, even though it was so well done. It was really then when you have that moment, though, of near victory that turns into absolute failure, and the world changes, and the gang is all separated, all your companions are separated all over the place, and you start then with Slavando starting off with his his Smile Brigade and going, putting together his parade and everything, go through the individual stories with Eric, and you just keep going on with all the different characters until you're eventually back to being the hero as a fish in Nautica, and like move on from that point and kind of regather your group and build. That Act 2, was the moment that made this my favorite Dragon Quest game, because within that act there was so much fantastic character growth. These were already fabulously fun characters. Slavando, throughout the course of the game, was my favorite because he really was, saying the word fabulous fits him perfectly in a great way. He was just fantastically fun, but he wasn't just this shallow, goofy stereotype. There was some depth to the character as he moved on, and it really worked well with the whole cast. Everyone had something about them that was interesting and unique, but also complemented the group. So I really enjoyed the characters throughout the storyline. Except again, I don't really like the silent protagonist usually, and he didn't work for me as well as in some other games where the silent protagonist kind of works, has a little bit more of a character. Say in something like Persona 3 and 4, those are rare instances where I didn't really mind the mostly silent protagonist, the more of a character for others to work off of rather than being that much of a personality themselves. Here it just felt a little more flat. It was a little more of just a typical hero, but it also, in a weird way, felt almost very old school, traditional to like the old NES JRPGs I remember playing. But yeah, the cast of characters in that act, there was so many interesting stories, and really built to so many different events. So, freeing Eric's sister and going through that, all the events in the Colosseum, and going through, Slavando finding out about his relationship with his father, all the different, so much with Hendrik and Rob, and all the different aspects of the past and in the hero's life, and revisiting those and getting to see the past and really building upon this story. Just hearing about it is one thing, but living through those different elements is such a different story. And of course then freeing the hero's father's soul from this eternal torment, and really getting the backstory a little bit even more with his family life and his past before the destruction of his kingdom. You get so much into that, and there's so much more characterization and depth in that chapter that's really what sold me and built up to the first ending. And that right there was just one or two elements shy of being fantastic, because there were a couple little loose threads that had to be tackled that formed what became the third act. Things like, you knew that there had to be something else behind the evil. You knew that there was some other, you already, because you saw the fall of the lantern was starting to fall from the sky before it was stopped. You saw all those little moments. You had little unanswered questions. You knew there was something else, another piece to the puzzle, another evil behind the evil that was your main confrontation. And those little things that I was glad to see that there was more story passes to address those, instead of having those few unanswered questions that were kind of left off. So that was the one part of that ending that wasn't quite satisfying. But Act 3 for me, while it did address those things, and I'm very happy it did, and it led to a much better ending. The actual ending itself, take the last boss fight and then the last 10-15 minutes of cutscenes, whatever, in the credits, that is much better, as the better ending. But the whole third act, I really had fun from a gameplay perspective, but did not enjoy story-wise. Because again, another little bit of a spoiler here, one of the main characters does die, and there's a major sacrifice to save everyone, but that leads into the incredible growth of another character, who starts to inhabit a bit of that other character, and he cuts her hair symbolically in a Final Fantasy IX-esque scene. The reason then for the third act, the way it takes place, instead of, I was hoping it was going to be kind of years later, and you have the revelation of this deeper more ancient evil that is really behind the evil, and the betrayal of the original hero by who eventually became the evil that you are aware of. I was glad to address that, but the way to address it was through a time travel story that I did not like at all for multiple reasons. One, the reasoning seemed shallow and frankly was illogical, because they go back in time primarily to save this one main character who dies. That's the main reason. The issue is that it takes everyone back to a point in time where the original evil is not defeated. It takes you back before Act 2 to the very end of Act 1. And you are risking the chance of messing up again and not being able then to defeat the evil, to have that victory. You're risking that possible chance just to save one individual. Which that already had a problem with the logic of that. That a little bit was dismayed by that. I wish there was some more logical reason for the time travel, like you had to go back in time. Something happened where to defeat the true boss, to defeat the true evil, you had to for some reason go back in time. That would make more sense than the real reason. And I didn't enjoy the experience as much. You had interesting things like the trials and a lot of build-up and experiencing stories in different ways in Act 3 to lead up to that true ending, and there was a lot of content. Gameplay-wise, there were tons of side quests, and again I mentioned the trials and things like that. There's a lot to do, and from that perspective I really thought it was fantastic, but I didn't enjoy it story-wise because you're rolling back the clock past my favorite act of the game, where there's so much interesting character growth and you got so much depth in it, and I just love that so much from the perspective of the cast of characters. And you're rolling all that back and you are getting this ending that doesn't feel as satisfying because it feels like they went through less once you roll things back, and it feels like there wasn't as much sacrifice to get there, and it just, I don't know, it didn't have quite that same feeling for me. And the other thing too is some of those story elements, like Sylvando coming home and reuniting with his father, you freeing the soul of like the hero's father, visiting different areas, again going back and redoing the freeing Eric's sister from her curse of being turned to gold. All those different things you can revisit, and they play out a little bit differently because you hadn't done that yet, because you rolled back before that point. But every single one of them was this shadow of what you'd originally experienced, instead of being some of them like visiting the gold tower and the Vikings turning to gold and going through this whole process of the curse, and it was like a 3, 4, depending on what you do, 5-hour thing before you do everything, and it was this huge eventful thing, and Eric losing his memory and then gaining his memory back through experiencing the painful story of his childhood. That was all so impactful and fantastic, and when you went back the second time after you went back in time, it was like a 10-minute thing and really wasn't impactful. To me, it felt very weak in comparison. If you hadn't experienced this stuff before, but in comparison it felt weak. Even Sylvando going back and all these different stories that you were able to revisit because you hadn't done them before. In the third act, they were just very brief and less interesting and less emotional versions of what you had done before, and I just felt like it was almost a chore to redo these things and have a lesser experience. It almost felt like it's a little bit soured those experiences a little bit. So it was a mixed bag at the end. The Act 3 was a mixed bag because there were those things that needed to be answered that had not been addressed. There were those things that needed to be defeated, and stories that needed to be told and revealed to reach that true ending, which was a much better ending. But the journey there had two aspects. Story-wise, I did not like it at all. I really didn't enjoy it. It was a bit of a chore to get through, but it was exciting and entertaining from a gameplay-wise. It opened up so much with what you're able to do and visit, and all the different challenges and trials and things that were open to you at that point. That was great. So it was a mixed bag on that point. But up until that point, and overall, I absolutely loved this game. You know, a little bit of negativity again with my experience at the very end, but 80-90% of it was absolutely stellar. Was a fantastic experience. If you like traditional Japanese RPGs in general, if you like the Dragon Quest series specifically, get this game. It is brilliant. It is fantastic. There's unbelievable amount of content packed into here. It was a longer experience than I was expecting too, because when I got to the end of the second act and knew there was a third act going in after the credits and knowing kind of where the story was going to go, I thought, as far as those things needed to be answered, I thought it was going to be a 5-hour thing, maybe. And it was like a 20-hour thing, and there was so much more I could have done. I could have done so much more. There's tons in there. Easily, you could spend easily over 100 hours on here. I think I was like 70-something hours through it. And I didn't want to spend more time. I could have, but I didn't want to at that point. I got what I wanted out of it, my fill with the side stuff that I did do, and it was a brilliant experience. Again, everything about it. Art style was fantastic. I loved the music. The gameplay was traditional in a good way. It didn't feel old. It felt old-fashioned in a classic way, and had enough little bit of creativity and changes to different dynamics with certain ways that you would use the different combinations of powers and switching out your group, and there's just enough there that felt fresh, that it felt homely and comfortable, but it's still exciting and invigorating. Everything about Dragon Quest XI was great. Just had those few problems in Act 3 that were more of just, I didn't like the way the story went, but even then it was still enjoyable, even though it wasn't to my taste. It was overall a brilliant experience. Check it out. I'm very happy I grabbed this. I'm happy that the demo hooked me into this, and I'm also happy that I was able to finish this, because I was getting a little bit worried. I was trying to play this before Shenmue 3 came out, and at the point of filming this, we're only about a week away from that, and I was getting a little bit worried over the weekend when I was still playing this game, and I was like, oh man, am I going to have enough time? But luckily I was able to get through it and experience everything I wanted to, not rush through anything, able to experience the whole thing. And it's a game I'd revisit. It's a game that I think someday I will play again. And again, finally beat out Dragon Quest VIII as my favorite in the series. So, fantastic game, and I look forward to seeing where they go from here, because I had to look up after a while. There's past the true ending, the second ending of the credits, there's a couple more post-credit sequences, and most of it I understood what they were alluding to, but there's one little snippet at the end that I wasn't sure, because I had not played Dragon Quest 2 and 3. I played 1 on the NES, but I hadn't played the rest on the NES. I played later ones after that. And I'm curious now, the way this seems to be fitting in with the story, if we're going to see like a remake of Dragon Quest 3, or how they're going to go through this, or I think 12 is already well into production, so I think maybe 12 and then we'll see. I don't know. I'm actually really curious to see where the series goes from now with the success of Dragon Quest XI, and how that fits into the overall chronology of the series, and how they perceive the future and how it rolls out from this point on. So Dragon Quest XI, a brilliant experience, and I think great things are to come in the future from the Dragon Quest franchise.